Okay, we are live. Live. It looks like we're live. Are we live? Hello. All right, let's fix my hair. Hey, all right. How you doing? Okay. Welcome to All About English Live. And we're going to hit on the do's and don'ts of business with Americans. Okay. So if you are in the house, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you're not in the house, well, then you can watch this later on and leave a comment down below. Okay, so the question of the day. Let's see if anybody shows up. We're going to give people a minute here. Come on in. Come on in. The water's fine. Take a real quick sip. Oh, hey, Mandy. All right, welcome. Welcome, Mandy. Thanks for joining me. And Mandy, how's your week been? I haven't seen you in a few days. I wonder how long the delay is on because last time I did this, there was quite a delay. I was getting a lot of questions a little bit later, and I think some questions even came in after I logged off. So I'm going to try to allow for some delay. And if you are getting this, let me know. Okay. Because today we're talking about it's a long story. It's a long story. Well, how about you wait until the next time we meet and then you can tell me the long story. Hopefully it's not a bad story. Hopefully it's a good story because I hate I hate sad stories. All right. Well, Mandy, it looks like it might just be you and me to get this thing started, and I have a whole lot of information to cover tonight. So, let's just get started. And since we're about 2 minutes in, all right, we'll see if anybody's going to show up. All right. I'm going to assume that the answer is no. Nobody's coming for you. Nobody's coming. So, are you ready to take on the challenge of doing business with Americans? Do you feel like you're not quite sure how to navigate American business etiquette and culture? Well, don't worry, because you're not alone. In fact, it's a common struggle for many non-native speakers. But fear not, we've got you covered. And then on this episode of All About English Live. All About English Live. All right, let's jump into our slideshow. Navigating the business culture in the United States. Navigating the business. Look at this guy. Business culture in the United States. We get up and we wear shorts and do meetings with our shirts untucked. That looks like a tech startup in that picture. All right, let's jump in with an introduction to business etiquette. So, welcome to All About English Live. I am your host, Dennis Wilborn, and today we're talking about American business etiquette. You already probably know that the United States is one of the largest and most influential markets in the world. We Americans love to buy stuff. And if you're an English learner and a professional looking to improve your skills, you're probably aware that understanding American business etiquette is essential for your success. Now, here's the thing. American business culture, it can be tough to navigate even for native speakers. Really. I mean, think about it. There's 340 something million Americans. About half of those are working in professional situations. So, yeah, there's a lot of different cultural things to navigate. There's so many unspoken rules and subtle nuances that it's very easy to inadvertently break a rule or something like that. But don't worry. On this episode of All About English Live, I'm going to give you all the tips and tricks that you need to understand how things work in the US. I'll cover everything from building relationships to negotiating deals so you can communicate and do business like a pro. And as always, be sure to stick around to the end for that bonus tip. You'll want to see that. So let's just jump in with the first topic, business relationships in the US of A. Business relationships in the USA. Now, I've got your attention, so let's jump into the first point. How we can understand those business relationships in the US. In this segment, I'm going to dive into the world of American business relationships. And I'm going to start with a question. Have you ever found yourself dealing with Americans and overwhelmed by the friendliness and openness in Americans in business settings? It can be a little startling at the beginning for those people who are more reserved. Maybe you come from a culture that's a little more reserved, but that's okay. I'm going to help you with some tips and insights and a little bit of cultural nuances and expectations for American business settings. Did you know that Americans don't necessarily need to have a personal relationship with you before doing business with you? You see, with Americans, it's all about the transaction between companies. It's not necessarily about the individuals. Now, that being said, Americans do want to do business with people that they like and can relate to. So, first impressions, friendliness, trustworthiness, and enthusiasm all play a role in whether or not a business deal will be successful. Another thing, I'm going to change this. Another thing to keep in mind. Hey, look at that guy. He's a handsome devil, isn't he? Another thing to keep in mind is that Americans really value their time. And we want to get straight to the point in meetings or any kind of situation in business. Time is money is a common phrase used in the US. So don't be surprised if your American colleagues take a very direct approach to keep things moving along. If your culture is not direct, you may benefit from being more direct than you normally would. I know I struggled with that when I came to Korea and started doing business with more Korean companies. I come from the American school of being direct, and the Koreans, not so much. There's a lot of talk that goes on. Meetings can last for ages, and it's not always beneficial to take the direct approach. And so that was a bit of a learning curve for me. But if you're in the US doing business, you're going to want to be direct. So, speaking of meetings, let's talk about meetings and greetings in the States. Okay, in this segment, I'm going to talk about do's and don'ts of greetings and meetings. All right. Understand that when you're greeting people in the US, it's a little bit different than what you may have read in some textbooks about English, and maybe especially if your textbooks are from British England, British English. So let's get started with some of these tips. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Americans are very friendly. So most greetings in the US tend to be more informal, and they typically involve a handshake. Hey, how you doing? So we like to smile a lot. So Americans are often quick, very quick to use first names. So be prepared for them, the American colleagues that you're working for, to share their first name and to use yours. But keep in mind, Americans tend to be positive and enthusiastic. So they may just vigorously shake your hand and put their hand on your back or hold your arm. The thing to remember is maintain eye contact while you are shaking someone's hand or greeting them. It's very important. Okay. Another thing you might want to be aware of is that, and I'll touch on it a little bit later, just because Americans are quick to use first names, don't start off by using someone's first name until the time comes when they invite you to use their first name. Okay, I'll get into that a little bit later. So here's a little bit of a fun tip. When Americans ask, how are you? Or how are you doing today? That's generally not looking for a detailed answer. So a simple fine, thanks, or I'm doing well is just fine. Okay, I've gotten this question a lot from people from Europe, people from Asia. Why do Americans say, how are you? Or how you doing? And then just keep on walking? And the answer is because basically it's a greeting for us in America. Hey, how you doing? is very common to hear. So just say fine or I'm doing great. That's plenty to respond with. At the same time, you may also hear somebody say see you soon or see you later when they're saying goodbye, which is exactly what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean I'll actually see you soon. Okay. You may never see a person again, but it's quite common to say see you later. So, another thing to keep in mind is about American body language. It can be confusing because we have that friendly smile and we like to give hugs occasionally, maybe slap you on the back if they feel that you've established a rapport with them, made a connection there. But on the other hand, not every American is that way. Some Americans don't like touching, and they'll usually make it clear by avoiding the touch. So uh, just keep in mind, many Americans have a strong sense of personal space and are usually comfortable if there's some physical distance between you when you're talking. Don't get right up in front of them. That's a little bit too close. So back away, and it's much more comfortable. Uh, if you are come from a culture that is comfortable with physical contact, pay attention to the American that you're talking to and just check the signals and remember to keep your distance if they start to look uncomfortable. I know that was a real struggle for many of my colleagues from America when we first came to Korea, because Korea doesn't have the same distance between, they don't have the same problem with personal space. So Koreans will get really close to you. They'll touch your arm and thing, even hold hands. And uh, that can make some Americans very uncomfortable. So keep that in mind if you are from a culture that gets a little closer. Um, if you are from a culture that avoids physical contact, also keep in mind that Americans, when you do get close and you start to make a bond, Americans are not afraid of physical contact. Holding your hands, or not holding hands, but maybe giving you hugs or even putting your arm over your shoulder, light slaps on the back, those kinds of things are very common in the States once you've developed a bond. All right. Now we're going to jump into 4 small little topics: punctuality, business cards, shaking hands, and titles. As I said, this is very quick, so we'll just jump right into this. We're going to hit on punctuality. In the US, as I said, time is money. Time is money. And being late is a big no-no. So be punctual because it's a sign of respect and professionalism. So be punctual. What does being punctual mean? Punctuality means being on time. Okay, be on time. When you are on time, it shows that you value the other person's time, and it helps when you're building a rapport, building a relationship. Now, it's kind of regional in the US. People from the Midwest area and the Northeast tend to be more conscious of being on time. They're very focused on, I mean, I went to college in the Northeast, and we had a saying: if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. So being on time is very, very important to those folks in the Midwest. If you're from the West or from the South, like California, Texas, Arizona, maybe from Louisiana or Mississippi, it's a little bit more casual, but you should still try to be on time. Jumping into business cards. Business cards are every culture has their own kind of rules when it comes to business cards. America is no different. However, Americans view a business card as a simple way to exchange contact information. It's for future reference. So it's very casual. If someone takes your business card, looks at it, and puts it in their pocket, try not to be offended. That's typical in the United States. They're going to use that business card to hold on to for future reference. So it's not a big deal, unlike some other countries where it is a big deal. But I tell you, if I know in Korea, people hold on to those business cards. They'll put them on the table in front of them in a meeting so that, they can refer to it at that time. I know that Japan has their culture with business cards. So I'm curious, if you have a special business card culture, leave a comment in the comments box down below. I'm very curious about that. Let's get into the next topic of shaking hands. Shaking hands. Again, we talked about a little bit about touching and maintaining your personal space. But when it comes to shaking hands, Americans, this is like the business greeting for Americans. Americans greet with a firm handshake while maintaining eye contact. And even though you're holding hands, you don't have to hold hands or shake hands for a long time, but it definitely can't be a weak handshake. You don't want your handshake to be weak. You want a nice, strong grip, not to where you're crushing the hand, but firmly grasping. And when you're in a meeting or a business setting, you want to make sure you're shaking hands with everybody, every person that you meet, including the women, including the men, regardless of seniority. So if you meet the CEO or the janitor, you should still shake hands. It's very, very polite. Now, once you have shaken hands, back up a little bit. Keep that comfortable distance so that you can maintain the personal space. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about titles. Titles. Okay. I mentioned before that Americans are very quick to jump into using the first name. However, when you first meet, when you're addressing people, you want to use the title and the last name up until they tell you to use their first name. Okay. Now, don't worry, because we tend to go to a first name basis very quickly. So don't be surprised if right after that first introduction, they say, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. Call me Dennis." Or, well, if their name is not Dennis, then you should be surprised. Now, another side thing, if you're going to introduce other people, be sure to use their titles and add a little bit of context for who they are. So, you might say, this is Bob. He's part of the marketing department. This is Susan. She's in charge of outside contracts and so on and so forth. Giving the title, the name, and a little bit of context for who they are will help with keeping track of who people are in general. Okay. All right. I see I'm getting some good comments there. And so when you're first meeting people, it's just best to introduce yourself. When you are introducing yourself, you say your name, give your title, and maybe a little bit about what you do. Very little bit about what you do in the company that you're working with or working for. So, for example, if you're in the marketing department, or maybe you're the director of marketing, then you might say, "Hi, I'm Dennis. I'm director of marketing for blah, 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 XYZ company. And we work on marketing mainly with, internet marketing," or something along those lines. So that's something that you can definitely use. All right, so let's jump into communication style in the US of A. Oh, that's a little bit of a funky slide. I didn't format that very well. Can you read that? I hope so. I hope so. It's a little small on my page, but that's all right. So, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, that's something we call America, directness is the key. Remember that. Directness is key in America. Yes means yes. No means no. And maybe actually does mean maybe. It doesn't mean, it isn't a polite way of saying no. So if you are looking for subtle hints or trying to read between the lines when you're talking to an American, trying to find out what does he really mean by that statement, just be aware you might need to adjust your approach and recognize most Americans in a business setting are going to say exactly what they mean. Now, I'm not going to say every American, but most. Now, keep in mind, here's one thing that you want to keep in mind that is true about Americans. while it is considered rude to interrupt someone when they're speaking, it does still happen quite often in America. If you need to jump in and make a point while someone is talking, just say, "Excuse me," during a pause, and then continue with what you have to say. So it is possible to interrupt someone. Just be polite and say, "Excuse me, I just have one thing to add," or something along those lines. So, speaking of pauses, Americans, we really don't like silence. Such a strange cultural thing. Americans do not like silence, and we feel awkward sometimes if things get silent. So you should always try to be ready to fill a gap in the conversation. So if you're in a meeting, for example, it's expected that people will take part. They'll ask questions. Because if you stay quiet in a meeting, people might assume that you don't have anything to add, or maybe worse, that you didn't come to the meeting prepared. So you really want to always have something. I like to say, always have something in your back pocket, uh, just in case. And if that's something that you want to do with your English, I'm often saying practice, practice, practice. Have imaginary conversations with yourself. Ask questions. Think of questions in advance. That way, you always have something in that back pocket and you can fill the silence, fill the gaps in a conversation very easily and quickly. So, another thing about meetings in the US, meetings are very, very serious. It's serious business, man. It's very serious. Meetings are like, yeah, we're so serious about our meetings. So again, though, time is money. So be prepared when you come to a meeting in the US. Be prepared to stick to the agenda and document all of the outcomes of the meeting. Because time is money, Americans usually try to get to or reach a decision quickly and then move on to the next topic. Now, some people might believe that this seems rushed, but that's how American business is done. We like to come to a decision, and once the decision's made, move on. I know that it was very frustrating for me when I was working in a Korean company many years ago. People would make a decision, or they wouldn't make. We'd have an hour or 2 hours of a meeting, and never come up with a final decision on a topic and say, "Okay, we'll come back to this tomorrow." And I would used to get so frustrated. What do you mean we can't come up with a decision? So in America, be aware, people love to get into those decisions and do it quickly. Okay. Now, before diving into business in a meeting, it's quite common to start meetings with a little bit of small talk to ease any tension and to test the mood of the meeting and to make people feel more comfortable. So small talk topics can include things like work in general, sports, the weather, travel, food. Sometimes you may even include family stuff, depending on what, the people that are in the meeting. But keep in mind that this part of the conversation will not last very long, usually. And once everyone is settled in, people like to get right to the point. So, you know, if you want to continue the conversation later on, you'll want to talk to that person after the meeting. Okay. Here's something that I get a lot. People are quite surprised that Americans are very comfortable. Americans in business are generally comfortable with conflict and very open to disagreeing. My mother will tell you that I'm certainly open to disagreeing, and my wife would probably agree. So this may be a little bit different from your culture. I don't know where you're from. If you're from Asia, I know it's probably a much different culture, but Americans are completely okay disagreeing. This is how we communicate. So please, if someone disagrees with you, if they're American, try not to take it personally. It's just how we communicate. Criticism is usually handled publicly and very directly. And when we have disagreements, we talk about them openly in meetings. So that's one thing that I love about the freedom of America. Don't be afraid to speak up and voice your opinion, because it's part of the process, and you are expected to take part in the meetings after all. So it's actually kind of fun when you get used to it. So give it a shot. I mean, don't be afraid to disagree. That's the way we operate. So overall, communicating effectively in the United States comes down to being direct, speaking up, and filling in the gaps in conversation. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm always telling you, be ready to ask questions and be ready for people to openly disagree. It happens. Who knows? Maybe while you're in America, you might learn a new interest in like American football or American barbecue. All right. American barbecue. I love barbecue, especially good Texas barbecue. All right, let's get into negotiation. There's our bonus. Thanks for sticking around until the end here. The bonus section is all about negotiations. Now, if you're ready to become an expert negotiator in the United States, then in this bonus segment, I'm going to give you the insider tips you need to navigate negotiations and contractual business agreements like a pro. Now, you're not going to become a pro from this one little section, but this is the key things to remember. So, first things first, Americans are all about the deal. The deal. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, number 45, was famous for writing a book called The Art of the Deal. You should read it. It's actually a good book. So, as I mentioned before, Americans do not need to have a relationship with you before they start talking business. In fact, the only thing that most Americans are looking for is likability. Likability, the ability. Do you have the ability to be liked? Okay. So that means, are you trustworthy? Are you honest? Are you friendly? Those are the things that you're looking for in a negotiation. Now, when it comes to negotiation, most Americans look at a negotiation as a problem-solving exercise with the primary goal of getting mutual benefits for both parties. We call that a win-win situation. I did a short video about that the other day. Something that really surprises people is that Americans tend to ask for more than they expect to ultimately get. So don't be surprised if the first offer seems outrageous. Don't let it throw you off, because you might go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're asking for so much. It's just part of the negotiating dance, okay? Because we never expect, it's actually called the big ask. Always ask for more than you expect to get, and then lower it down a little bit, bring it down. It's okay. It's totally okay. And don't be surprised when an American throws an offer at you that seems crazy. Okay. And I know I've said it before, but Americans value straightforward communication and really appreciate when you use the facts and data. Use facts and data to back up your position. So be ready with those charts and graphs to do all that. One thing to keep in mind is that, like I said before, Americans like to move quickly. They don't like to feel like there needs to be some kind of personal relationship between the parties before making a deal. Okay. So they don't want to waste any of that time, because time is money, right? Be prepared. If you're in a negotiation with an American company or group, the negotiations will tend to move quickly. Okay. Now, once you have a contract and it's signed, that is considered a legally binding document. So make sure you're scrutinize all the details. Scrutinize means get that magnifying glass and check every little thing, all the fine print. And you understand that all the details are understood in the negotiation. If there are any disagreements later on, everyone is going to look back at that contract later on. And oftentimes there are state and federal laws that apply to the contract. So make sure if you're doing business with an American company, have a U.S. trained attorney or lawyer familiar with American contract law on your side. Don't sign anything until you're sure you know what you're talking about, because a verbal agreement is rarely considered binding in the US. So make sure everything is in writing and get it checked and double checked. And that's all the tips that I have. With those tips in hand, you will be ready to start negotiating with an American company. I will probably have a separate video just about negotiation because it's a big topic. And I was talking with my younger brother Brandon, who we had a live stream a few weeks ago, a month ago, and he would possibly agree to do some negotiation discussion, have an open conversation about that. So, and on that note, that is a wrap for today on All About English Live. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you had as much fun learning about all of this American business etiquette as I did talking about it. I hope you find the tools are useful to you and that you're ready to put these tips into action. And wow, your American colleagues with your newfound knowledge. Remember, if you want to stay on top of your game and impress your peers, make sure to join me every Saturday night for more exciting tips. And I'll be here with helpful insights, tips, and tricks to help you navigate the world of business English like a pro. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a like as a thumbs up. And if you have any thoughts or comments on today's topic, if you have any topics you're dying for me to talk about, drop them down below in the comments section. I want to hear from you and keep the conversation going. And until next time, remember that learning English is an adventure. And now we're going to go to questions. I love it. I love it. I love it. And man, is it hot over here. It is hot over here. Whew. Mandy, thank you so much for asking some great questions. We have somebody else who's watching but hasn't said hello. Hello, other person watching. Leave a comment. Let me know who you are, where you're from. So let's take a look at the first question. Oh, no. First question, Mandy, you asked quite a while ago. When I first see clients, what is the proper sentence I should say? When I first see clients, what's the proper sentence? Well, I mean, that's if you're meeting a client for the first time, I did mention it earlier. You want to start with your name. Hi, I'm Mandy. I'm, your job title, and I take care of this aspect of the business, and that's usually plenty to start with. And of course, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, or pleasure to meet you, or something along those lines. You don't want to go into too much detail, because just if it's a large group, introduce yourself, your name, your title, your function, and then just shake everybody's hands. Try to use everyone's name so you can remember later on. That's also helpful. Oh, you already answered my question about the business card. Great. I positioned the business card in a relevant spot for easy reference as well. That sounds like it's the kind of standard Asian routine. Put the business card either on your notebook or in front of you on the table so that you can easily reference it. It actually makes good sense, to be honest. But the reason I brought up the business cards is because mostly because you should try not to be offended. If you go to America to do any business, you hand out your business card, it's going in a pocket, or it's going into a business card wallet or something along those lines. Americans don't tend to consider it as it's not as useful until you get back to the office and put it into your electronic file or your Rolodex or whatever. So another good question. Wow, Mandy, you got all the good questions going. Okay. So during a greeting, if a client introduces their title and I am unsure of its meaning, how should I respond? Okay, so if you're unsure of the meaning of their title, how should you respond? Well, remember what I always say is always try to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions at all, especially if you're dealing with Americans. Americans are very forgiving. We're very open to answering questions. And we love to give out strange titles to people. It's weird. It's weird. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, I think it was in the 90s, they started calling people uh, sanitation engineer. Guess what a sanitation engineer is? A sanitation engineer is just a janitor, a person who cleans up the office or cleans up the bathrooms and the toilets. I mean, so there was a stage when people would give really ridiculous titles to people, and some people still do. So if you're ever uncertain of what a title means or what anything means for that matter, just say, "Oh, really? That's interesting. I've never heard that title before. What do you do?" And that'll give you a better idea of what it is that they do. And oftentimes, when you ask questions of people about them, about what they do, it's a great way to break the ice. It's a great way because people love talking about themselves. It is what it is. When you start talking with another person and you share that information, yeah, they're gonna be happy to tell you more about themselves. So yeah, just ask them. Don't be afraid. Just ask a question. And how about this one? One last one from Mandy. I don't know who else is online, but if you have any more questions, I'm going to hit this last question. Uh, Take a few minutes, and then that's it. So, how about small talk after the meeting? I feel awkward every time. I may talk about the weather, ask about their trip. At that moment, it's just like the air is freezed. Ooh, the air is frozen. I believe frozen. Um, Small talk after a meeting is pretty. I don't want to say that it's rare. I'd say the end of the meeting is usually when people say their goodbyes. It's like thank you for coming, and you would walk people to the door and things like that. It's not usually the time for small talk at the end of the meeting. The small talk is for the beginning, where you can kind of get a feeling for the mood of the people. You may ask some small talk while you're walking to the door, some things like so. If you're visiting, it depends on where you are. If you are visiting their office, then you may ask, where's a good place to have lunch around here, or do you have any recommendations for places to see or things to see or places to go and things to do while I'm here in town. Um, so that's assuming you're traveling to the U.S. If they are visiting you and in your office, in your space, then I think you might ask, do you have any plans after the meeting? Do you have any plans for the rest of the day? What are your lunch plans? Maybe you might invite them to go to lunch or something. Or, you know, you might say, is there anything else I can help you with getting around in town? That'll help you to build some rapport and things like that. It'll help you build that relationship out. So I hope that helps you it's the best answer I can come up with. Again, I don't think small talk is common during the end of the meeting. Small talk is really rare at the end. You'd want to have your small talk at the beginning, and then at the very end of the meeting, you just kind of say your goodbyes, have a little bit of warm, thank yous and things like that. But that's pretty much where I would leave that. Okay. All right. I don't see any more comments, but thanks for the thumbs up, Mandy, and everybody else. Thank you for joining me this evening. I really enjoy getting on. My apologies if you were waiting for me to join in last week. Everyone in my house was sick except for me, and I was trying to take care of them and trying not to get sick of myself at the same time. So I apologize. Thank you for bearing with me, for not joining me last week, or for not joining you last week. But let me know in the comments later, or send me a message if you have any specific topics you would like me to talk about next week. As I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking my brother and I are talking about maybe coming on in a week or two, and he'll join me again, where we can talk about negotiations. Negotiations are a very fun topic. He is not. I think it'd be a good conversation because I am a much more disagreeable person than he is. So I'm a more aggressive when it comes to negotiation. I'm still friendly, as you know, but when it comes to negotiation, I'm the kind of guy who's really forward, straightforward, and he is much more on the. He tries to keep things as calm as possible. He's much more agreeable than I am. So I think it would be an interesting conversation to look at two different Americans from the same family and our different viewpoints on the topic of negotiation. So, and all right, well, if that's all the questions we have for today, we've been on for 41 minutes. Oh my gosh. Thanks so much for joining me on a Saturday night. Have a great rest of your weekend, and just keep on practicing. You're doing great. See you next time.